YouTube! Welcome back to Figure Posing channel. Today we're going to do another posing tutorial again. This time with Hot Toys TVA Loki. It's going to be the same format as the Black Widow one. So first a durability pose, second a pose where creases are allowed, third a pose with uneven footing, fourth pose will be an extreme pose, fifth will be a pose straight from source material. Let's get posing. So TVA Loki is quite a cool figure and it comes with a lot of stuff. If you've seen the Disney Plus series Loki, you'll recognize Miss Minutes and the daggers and the collar, the TVA jacket, the temp pad, reset charge, flaming sword and magic effects. Now as said, the first pose will be a pose you'll be able to leave the figure in without any damage. We'll be using these two holding hands and a dagger and the temp pad. Now for starters, I just wanted to get the flaming sword holster off, and to do that you do it like you do any piece of clothing or jacket. You just turn the hands backwards. Sometimes you need to pop the hands off. We'll manage without doing that. If you want to put the jacket on and off, take the hands off. And also the head. For the holster, you just need to do the arms backwards. Now, like I said, this is how I take the hands off. I just use my nail on my thumb to hold the peg back so it stays in, because it's hella annoying when the peg goes into the hand instead of the arm. To put the hands back, I bend the elbow and then just put the hands back. Now for this first pose, we'll kind of do the Black Widow first pose, but less dramatic, because Loki isn't that much of a poser as Black Widow is. As you can see, the feet are a bit asymmetrical. That's just to make it more interesting. Loki is going to face one side a bit more than the other side, and the side he's facing, you'll put that foot a bit more outwards. And you don't need to tilt the legs back as much as you did with Black Widow. Also, the weight distribution in the legs is almost 50-50 with Tom Hiddleston's Loki. Unlike with the Black Widow posing video. So this Loki one will be a lot more easy to do in his lower legs. Now we're going to have Loki look at the temp pad in his right hand. As you can see, I'm trying to fiddle a bit with his tie, and because his necktie can go all over the place, and you can put it to a certain side if you want to show a bit of movement. You do a sharp left or right if you want to show a sharp right or left movement. In this case it's kind of neutral. We're using the dagger holding hand to hold the temp pad and just angle Loki's head towards the temp pad. Now I guess the basic pose is kind of clear, right? It's just holding a temp pad, holding a dagger. So in these types of poses, the minutiae of the poses are really important. So you see me twisting the torso a little bit. Just tweak every joint, also the wrist joints and the elbow joints and the shoulders, until you think it looks natural. So sometimes you need to look at it from different angles. Here I cock the wrist a bit. Just take a look at it from different angles and just see what pleases your eye. And in this case, I was kind of done. So if you want to copy this pose, my advice would be mainly look at the position of both wrists, and maybe the elbow that's holding the dagger, because it's these positions that make this pose natural or not. As you can see, the necktie kind of shows a right movement from Loki, because it's a bit to the left. Maybe it's a bit too sharp. But here I just changed the temp pad and the dagger with two daggers, and I raised the arm up. Now of course we also had some other accessories, and this time we're going to use the magic effect with his right arm. For guns, I usually say put the gun in the hand first, but I think for the flame effects just try to angle the hand and wrist properly first and then just add the flame effect. It can be a bit tricky to add them afterwards. Just remember the thumb doesn't have an indentation, and then the rest will figure itself out. Now for this pose I wanted to angle the flame kind of straight up, so therefore I needed to cock the wrist a bit more so the flame would actually point upwards. The rest of the pose is still the same. Now as you can see, Loki isn't looking at the magical effect. I kinda had two choices. Either he was looking at the magical effect, being in awe of his own magic, or he's looking at his opponent readying his magic. Now for this pose, it's basically still the same pose, but I switched up the dagger and the magical effect hand. So now he has the dagger pointed towards his enemy and just has the magical effect at the ready. Now when you do this pose, you need to tweak the arm that is pointing the dagger a bit, as you can see. The elbow is a bit outwards and the dagger is pointing towards the direction Loki is facing this time. Always try to keep in mind the story you're trying to tell with the pose when you try to execute one. Because it's little details that actually can sell a pose or break a pose, in my opinion. Now this is still going to be a variant of pose number 1, but I wanted to try the jacket on because it's kind of a cool jacket, but it's sort of a hassle to put on. Just make sure to take the head off, in addition to bending the arms backwards and taking the hands off. Now here I'll just be adding the two daggers because I wanted to go for a dual wielding pose again, and to replicate pose number 1 again, it needed just a little twist of the torso again, and Loki facing to the right to his opponent. So initially I wanted to go for the one pointing dagger and one dagger at the ready again, but while doing that it kind of seemed more appropriate to have two daggers at the ready. It just seemed like a cooler pose and it fit the jacket a bit better, I think. We'll still call this pose number 1, because the base is exactly the same. It's still the legs at a 50-50. One foot will point a bit more outwards, it's the right foot, and that's the direction Loki will be facing. I just open the jacket a little bit for some motion. Now, instead of having two daggers in hand, I thought it might be cool to have one dagger in his hand, and then just put the other hand in his pocket. So a Hot Toys hand won't fit in the pocket, so you just take his hand off and just stick the wrist bag in his pocket pants, and it'll actually look like he's holding his hands in his pocket. Now to make this pose a bit more natural, I twisted the arm a bit inwards, because having it outwards like in the dual wielding pose just didn't seem to fit right. Somehow this is a more closed off pose, so both arms should be closed off then. Now, as opposed to the dagger pointing at an enemy, we'll have the time capsule here, or the reset device. Loki still has his left hand inside his pocket, and I use the right splayed hand, and he's looking at the reset device. And after this, I just put the reset device on the floor and use the portal. I kind of like the portal. I think it adds something interesting to the scene. If you also have Sylvie, you'll have two portals, and you'll notice that Sylvie's portal is a bit shorter than Loki's portal. For pose number 2, we're going to use a chair. This, in fact, is the Hot Toys DX9 chair that came with the Joker, and pose number 2 is the pose where more creases are allowed. And we'll also use the magic effect, and we'll try to have Loki in a natural sitting position. Now, not all figures can do a natural sitting position. Usually the problem is that the upper legs won't flex enough, or that the figure doesn't fit the chair, or that the feet don't reach the floor. But Loki can do a sitting pose. Now, as you can see, this sitting pose is what you might think of when you think of sitting on a chair, but it's kind of boring. And to be honest, not many people would sit like this, right? Maybe Agent Smith. But other figures, I would recommend putting them in a more interesting position. And you can say a lot about Loki, but Loki is an interesting character. So he'll find out ways to sit on a chair differently. Now, as you can see, I went for one arm going over the chair and Loki leaning a bit more, slouching a bit more really. And to make it more interesting, just twist the torso a bit. And try to angle his legs in a different way. Basically, if you try to do interesting poses, having things symmetrically or at the same angle usually isn't a great idea. Except when dual wielding, of course. Like you've seen with the double daggers, that looked pretty cool. And also in the Black Widow tutorial, I told you about when you're dual wielding guns, the arms usually move symmetrically if you're shooting at the same time. Now for this pose, like I said, we'll be using the magic effect, and Loki will be looking at the magic effect this time. So we'll angle his torso and his head and his arm to line up with the magical effect, and you can either have him look at his hand or at the middle of the magical effect. If you want to do these types of poses and it's kind of hard to imagine what a good position would be or a natural body position would be, you could also do the poses yourself. Just sit in a chair, make it interesting, and just look at what your body's doing. And then try to remember the points of contact with your body and the chair, and how the weight distribution would be in normal life, and then just try to copy it with a figure. If that's not the way you would like to do things, you could also just copy things from the internet. Just Google a position, especially if you have from different angles, and then just copy it from the pictures you see. Now I don't really like doing it that way because it feels a bit too restrictive for me, but there's no right or wrong. Just use whatever method seems right for you. As for this pose, it's almost done. I just need to add magic effect. And I also need to reposition his arm a bit more so it actually seems like the weight of his body is, well, somewhere around his armpit or his upper arm pushing into the chair. Now as for this magic effect, it's the same thing with the gun. If you want to see if the line of sight is okay, just put the object between the figure and yourself, and just check out the eyesight. Now, like I said, when we previously used the magic effect, you can choose to either have Loki look at his opponent using the magic effect or looking at the magic effect. But this pose was more of a relaxed pose with no one in sight. He's just bored, entertaining himself with his magical effect, so he would be looking at his magical effect himself. So yeah, the pose is kind of done. Yeah, so Loki's ankles are double ball pegs, which give a great range of motion, but they're kind of finicky. As you can see, the angle could be better here. Bit of a close-up. As you can see, Loki's looking at his magical effect, and he's leaning on his chair. Like I said, try to make things a bit asymmetrical if you want to have them a bit more interesting. So one leg is more outstretched and the other one is flexed towards the chair. Now, this pose, I don't know how that came up, but there's a hand with two outstretched fingers, and I thought it could fit a dagger. So I went for a dagger throwing illusion. I can actually see the movement of Loki throwing the dagger, but maybe it's just me. Let me know if it comes across as Loki throwing a dagger, or if it actually just looks like a dagger stuck between his fingers. I'm going for the throw, of course. Now, a variant of this pose is Loki looking at the golden sword. He doesn't know the golden sword, so it wouldn't be that weird if he would look at the golden sword in amazement. For this pose, you'll have to bend the wrist inwards a bit and upwards, so it actually looks like he's looking at the sword. To have him portray him looking at it, just use the flat side towards Loki's face. After this, of course, I use the flame effect, and I think for the flame effect, you can have Loki actually looking at the tip of the flame effect, because you would be surprised if all of a sudden these flames came out of the sword, right? So you get kind of startled. Following that premise of the pose, maybe the open left hand wasn't the best choice, because if you're startled, then I think you would flex your elbow a bit more, but that was just after. The temp pad. Loki's looking at his temp pad, so this time the relaxed hand was appropriate again, the left relaxed hand. And that was it for pose number 2. So off to pose number 3. Again, we're going to use DX9 accessory. Because the third pose in these posing tutorial series is a pose with uneven footing. And I thought, given that Loki takes place in a TVA, which is an office, it would be fitting if Loki would use a table. And it's kind of bending the concept of uneven footing a bit, right? But one foot is on the floor and the other foot is higher. So it's uneven footing. Now Loki's right leg is almost outstretched and his left leg is bent. Because that's the leg he will pick up to actually sit on the table. Now, if you want to bend the legs, you'll need to strike a balance with his pants. So they need to be up enough so that you can bend the hip and the upper leg. But if you pull them up too much, then the white above the socks of the Loki figure will show, and that's atrocious. So that's just a sweet balance. After that, you just point his upper foot. You point him towards the floor in the same fashion you would with like a flying figure or a hovering figure, just to show that gravity does its work on the figure. So it's just a little twist to make it look like it's pointing downwards. The torso is bent a bit, the abdomen is bent a bit because he will be looking at something on the table. I was kind of figuring out what to do with his right arm, but I didn't think any hand gesture would be appropriate, so we'll just hide it in his pocket again. That kind of seems natural if you're in the office, right? Now, when you're here, you can kind of see where the pose will be going, but still you'll pick up some things that don't look natural. And here I'm adjusting the pants again, like I said. But when your eye picks up something that's not natural, just adjust it a bit until it comes across more appropriately. In this case, it's mainly the lower body that needs the most work, because it actually needs to look like he's sitting on the table. So that's why the bend in the upper legs and the hips is very important. And after that, the left foot, like I told you, so to our right, is the most important to get correct. And the correct way is when it actually looks like it's just dangling. Now we'll start adding some objects to the table. So the lamp is a DX9 lamp, and that is the Miss Minute computer. And of course, the temp pad and the reset device are very appropriate in the TVA. So that's what Luke will be looking at. More specifically, he's looking at Miss Minute's computer, so I just needed to twist and flex his upper body a bit more, so it actually looked like his left hand is reaching for the computer where Miss Minute is. And I almost forgot to add the golden sword, and then you can give a little attention to fabric like his tie. And once you're satisfied with the tie, then you're kind of done. So try to remember the most important part of this pose is the lower body. When the right foot is hovering above the floor, it can be really distracting. If the figure is not naturally sitting at his desk, it can be a bit distracting. As you can see, he's also, well, his upper body is leaning towards the middle of the desk, which is actually the way you would balance your body when you're trying to sit on a table. And then, like I said, the dangling foot is very important. Pose number 4. In the last video it was the source material one, but I thought maybe the extreme pose would fit a bit more as pose number 4 this time. To get some inspiration for this pose, I watched the Loki, Sylvie and He Who Remains fight a couple of times, just to get an idea for Loki's movement. I think that scene and the scene where Loki and Sylvie are with the timekeepers and they almost get pruned are the scenes where the most extreme movements are to be found. So definitely this was going to be a fighting pose. So as you can see, the right hand is already forward, and it takes a bit of an effort to raise the left hand in the way I want it to. If you want to raise arms usually with Hot Toys figures, just go in front first, so raise it straight up first, and then go to the side. I think because of the triple layers, this was a bit more difficult to do, so I just had to wiggle it around a bit, because the shoulder is like a ball, a big ball, where the upper arm connects to, and I just wanted to get it in this angle, so it just took some finicking. And I don't know if you've seen it, but the torso is twisted a lot. Maybe the jacket and the shirt cover it a bit, but I think it's almost 90 degrees. Nah, less than 90 degrees. I've used the outsplayed hand, and Loki is looking at the direction of the hand because I will be using the magical effect. Now, soft goods like this jacket are very useful and necessary to sell the pose because they can display some sort of movement. If you look at this movement, for instance, you see that I'm going for like a left swing, so he's turning his torso left with his right hand extended and his left hand up in the air, so his body turns to the left, and you can choose whether to have the jacket follow after the movement or if the movement is already done, because in that case the jacket will swing over and it will go across his body. So I went for the moment right in the movement, so therefore the jacket would be still in this position and not be across his body. That doesn't mean that the tie needs to go the same way. You can imagine the tie being stuck to your body because of the movement. In that case, you could do it like this, but it could also be the first thing that would swing across the body, and in that case you would have it like at the other side. Having it tucked inside there didn't really seem okay for me, so I went this route. Now sometimes you can use things like his jacket to grab onto the tie, just to make the move more dramatic, but I thought it didn't need it. And adding the magical effect, this is the final pose we got for the extreme pose. So I could have went with the magical effect hand going either with his fingers up or his fingers down. I think both versions would have made sense. After that, I just tried the double daggers because I like a dual wielding Loki. The daggers are pretty iconic for Loki, so I think you can never go wrong with a dual wielding pose. Over here you get a good look of what the coat is doing, and I think it works fine. And it's not even wired, to be honest. It just works. Instead of dual wielding daggers, I optioned for dual wielding magic effects. And this time I did turn his front hand downwards, and I think it looks cooler than the upwards version. Now, one magical effect and one golden sword. I didn't like using the flaming effect here because I like the flames to go straight up. So I thought maybe we'll do that for the next pose. So here it is, and now I had the flaming sword ready, and Loki is using some magic here, but it's right after the magic particle has gone. So that's why I didn't use it this time. Okay, we've reached pose number 5, and that's the pose that came straight from source material. Now the series poster is Loki just standing there with his collar on, so that didn't seem too interesting. So I was either going to do this one, when they're fighting timekeepers, or this one, with the portals and Lamentis. And I kind of decided to try a combination. So I would need open hands. Now you have the splayed open hands, and you have these open hands, but these seemed a bit too aggressive, so I went for the other ones. I just connected those, and as you can see, the Sylvis portal is on the right, and it's a bit shorter. It's less dramatic than it seems over here because Loki's portal is on a bit of a stand. Now this pose is not as aggressive as the previous one because he's kind of holding up his hands, seeming peaceful. He's a bit apprehensive if he needs to fight or if he needs to keep the peace. So for this pose, he kind of needed to be a bit submissive. Therefore, I moved the shoulders a bit forward, because if you look at yourself, if you have your chest out, you look a bit more aggressive, and if you have your shoulders forward, it seems a bit more submissive. Luckily, this figure has sort of a butterfly joint, like they would call it with Transformers, so you're able to do that. And then again, this is the base of the pose, and then you'll just need to adjust every joint a bit until you think it sells the story the best. And it can be just little tweaks and adjustments that make a huge difference. Now, over here, I thought it was ready, so I just needed to add Sylvie to the pose. Now, Sylvie is never submissive, so she has a more rough look to her. I had one shoulder up, and the shoulder that is holding the sword is down. She has one foot a bit forward, and I tweaked the torso just a little bit, so she has a more of an aggressive pose. To top it off, I also tilted her head, because she's tough and she's sassy. After that, I just thought to give Loki his daggers back, and of course you can't have that much of a submissive look when you're holding the two daggers. So that meant I also needed to change the arms and the wrist a bit, and if I need to look how to change the arms and wrists, I just imagine me standing there with the daggers and the way I would position them. And then I add the fact that it's not me standing there, but Tom Hiddleston Loki, and he would have a more classy, theatrical way to hold them, so I add that to the pose as well. Now, like I said before, usually I don't like things in my pose to be symmetrical, except when you're dual wielding. Then it can look really striking if things are symmetrical. So that's what I'm going for here. If you're taking a photograph, you can also try to position the daggers in a way where the light catches it the best. Or of course, you can position the light better so it catches the daggers the best. But the daggers are the easiest to rotate, so I would just rotate the daggers that way. Now, I was really having fun with Loki and Sylvie, so I thought, why not switch up the weapons a bit. When they are fighting the Timekeepers, Sylvie at one point gives Loki a sword, and Sylvie gets the prune stick. Now, for the prune stick of Sylvie, it might be tempting to use two of the stick holding hands. But I think just using one and one open hand makes the pose a lot more natural. So I chose that. Now, for the last variant of these poses, I needed to use the magic effects. Sylvie has very cool hands. She has this very cool green sheen on the inside of the hands, and her magic effects are stuck to the hands, which makes them a bit harder to change, because it's very hard to pick a point to grab onto. And Loki's hands, of course, are very easy to change, because they're bigger and the magic effects are loose, of course. And with that, we've come to the ending of pose number 5. I really hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial. With Loki, you don't have that much extravagant poses, but I think they're still interesting poses nonetheless. I really enjoy how the Loki figure makes you think of interesting poses in a different way than other Marvel figures do. So yeah, it's a keeper for me. If you would like to see some more posing content, join our Facebook group 6 Scale Posers. As the title says, it's a Facebook group meant for posing 6 scale figures. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any suggestions, just put them in the comments down below. And as always, never pose outside your comfort level, but keep posing, everyone.
Because of course, she's always having to